Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Hey, thanks for joining us for this edition of Donnybrook. Great to have you with us. Thanks for making us part of your evening or afternoon. And we've got a big special guest coming up later this hour. Jim McKelvey, the CEO of Square, is going to join us for the first time. But first, let's talk about the issues of the week and meet our panelists, starting with the news director for the Big 550 KTRS, Wendy Wiese, along with Mr. Bill McClellan from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. From the Riverfront Times and the Big 550 KTRS, Ray Hartmann. Looks like he's got a tan, maybe from the Lake of the Ozarks. And we've got Alvin Reid joining us from the St. Louis American, AM 590, and the Dave Glover Show on 97.1 FM News Talk.
I got
well,
my
Ray,
shirt on.
You got, oh, I like that shirt, Alvin. Nice job. Ray Hartmann, over the weekend, of course, the world discovered that Missourians really like to party at the Lake of the Ozarks. There was no social distancing. And of course, some people saw that as freedom. Other people saw that as, I guess, spreading coronavirus. The mayor of the city of St. Louis said, hey, she urges everybody to go into 14-day quarantine. The governor did not send the National Guard. You wrote about it in this week's Riverfront Times.
It was disgusting. It was an international story. It's amazing. I think we probably haven't got this much attention since Ferguson. I mean, as a state, it is unbelievable. And it's really a sad thing that this has become about politics. It's about common sense. And the governor showed no leadership. In fact, with the entire national, really, and international press, as I said in my column, he and Randall Williams, the health director, socially distanced himself from the story. Lyda Krewson, to her credit, was out there right away talking about it. And we got to remember the people who went to the lake, many of them, thousands of them in general, come from St. Louis. So this is a very local thing when they so, blatantly violate just common sense.
Yeah,
I think that.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I think that it wasn't any more of a story than the beaches in Florida or Venice Beach in California or the New Jersey beaches. All of these beaches have been, they've been the media fodder. I think the media at large is exhausted with those. So this was like a gift from heaven over a Memorial Day holiday weekend. I don't know that our less enlightened citizens are any less enlightened than citizens in other states. But I am, like all of you, very, very disillusioned and disheartened by the fact that a pandemic has been politicized to this point where we're in our political silos and we're either wearing masks or not wearing masks. And if I had a microphone at the pool, at all of those pools at Backwater Jacks in Lake of the Ozarks, I would have happily asked any of those people, do you run in the Komen Race for the Cure? Well, sure I do. My mother or my sister had breast cancer. Do you love Layla Anderson? The Blues mascot. Do you cry when you see that little girl fighting for her life? That's what this is about. This isn't about, I'm being weak and you're being strong. It's about those people. It's the same, people. Okay. That's what it's about.
Well, I think that the good thing about all this is we'll know in a couple of weeks. I mean, the people who say this is exaggerated and not much will happen, they might end up right. Or the people who say this is a terrible thing and they're going to bring the virus back to St. Louis, they might be right, but we'll know in a couple of weeks. So there's not any sense in getting too upset now, is what I say.
Well, I will have to say this, Wendy, that was the best statement on this whole thing I have heard since it began. And I honestly, that's hard. I'm saying that heartfelt. That was wonderful. I wish I could put into words what you just said. I will say that part of this, and I know at least I know two very conservative people who have said like that was too much. Now, whatever my thoughts are on this whole thing, what was going on at the Lake of the Ozarks was too much, and they are conservatives, and they have told me that in person. And then two, here's an aspect I didn't think of that one told me. So like, Alvin, you know, that program Ozark, that's what people in the United States think what the Ozarks are all about. Now, part of it is true, but you know, that thing, and they said like, oh, Ozark. Well, yeah, Lake of the Ozarks. They're just a bunch of just roustabouts and a lot of other bad words. And so that's how we got sucked into this thing, I think, nationally. And maybe it's more embarrassing than it is terrorizing. But like Bill said, we'll see. I'll end on this though. You know, just because it doesn't turn out bad, if you do a bad thing, it's still a bad thing. And so I'm not going to give the good folks down there who were from St. Louis to St. Louis County a pass if no one gets sick, because that was guys, still horrible.
Don't you think really it's just that we had a photo of people in bathing suits? But truth be told, there's a lot of lack of social distancing throughout our own community.
Yes,
whether
I
it's
agree.
That you go to a drugstore and people aren't wearing masks, or I mentioned before, people have been congregating like on Cinco de Mayo in Kirkwood or at the Wharf on Shoto, or you see teens running around together. It was the photo. You
First
could
of
have
all,
had 1,000 of these photos with similar situations.
No, Charlie, first of all, I agree with what Alvin said, although I would point out that, Wendy, if you had grabbed the microphone down there, they would have thrown you in the pool. But Bill, I disagree with you completely. First of all, we're not going to know in a couple of weeks. It takes much longer to.
Okay, it's just 3 weeks, then, right? We'll know in 3 weeks.
At least 6 probably to really impact. And even if we don't see something in the next 6 weeks, we could, this is a long game. They're talking about a second wave. We could be looking at this. And I do think this is not just symbolic. And by the way, Wendy, it actually led CNN, and it's been all over the cable news for.
I'm aware.
So, I mean, I don't know what caused. I agree that it's kind of weird that it got singled out so much, but it has. And I think it is beyond symbolism. It's really a sad thing, because it shouldn't. The mask is about protecting other people. It's about what you think of other people. That shouldn't be partisan. And quite frankly, if the president wasn't setting the example, we wouldn't be having the conversation.
Agreed.
Well, actually, let me ask you about the governor, Ray, who went to his granddaughter's graduation from high school at Sparta High in Christian County, where they haven't had one coronavirus death yet in Christian County. And it didn't look like the people in the stands were socially distancing, but the students were. 42 students in the graduating class. Do you have problems with the governor appearing and speaking in front of the group without a mask on?
Yes, and I don't. Obviously, it's under normal times, it'd be lovely that he's speaking at his granddaughter's commencement. That's fine. First of all, he's one of the few governors that permitted commencement gatherings, because they are, by all definitions of the CDC, inherently dangerous. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, while it may not seem like that, you know, you can look at the county and see very few infections. 140 people at the Great Clips in Springfield. 140 patients had clients of the hair clips, Great Clips, were exposed 20 miles away. And so it put a lot of people at risk. And again, we don't know what's going to happen, but it was, first of all, irresponsible to have any live commencement. And I'm surprised that there's not more said. Maybe he's getting a pass because it's his granddaughter. I don't know.
I give somebody a pass because it's their granddaughter.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
My granddaughter's, I mean, she's not, you know, she's only 9, smart enough to be a graduate of high school, but not officially. But I mean, I do give the guy a little bit of a pass for that. And he's in a county where they haven't had much of a problem And I mean, of all the faults that I put on Governor Parson, and there are many, speaking at his granddaughter's graduation is not one.
Well, let me ask you this, Bill,
Pandemic,
about
it's
the governor deciding to move the Medicaid expansion measure to the August ballot. And now it turns out, after 300,000 or so signatures have been gathered, Missourians are going to vote to expand, or they'll be given the choice of whether they want, as a state, to expand Medicaid coverage for low-income Missourians. This is going in front of the voters. We knew that. What we didn't know until this week is that it's going to be on the August ballot, where typically speaking, fewer people will be voting. So what's your political analysis here?
You speaking to me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Well, it is just another example of how the Republicans are trying to win elections despite opposing what the majority of the people think. I mean, I think that the majority of the people favor expanding Medicaid, just like they favored raising the minimum wage, just like they opposed right to work. And like those issues, the Republicans now have to try to always get on the August ballot because they don't want to be out there in November defending unpopular things. I mean, Governor Parson does not want to be out there in November having people say, what do you think about Medicaid? He wants that out of the way in August. And it's really a study in political chicanery or genius that they always try to avoid getting these issues on the November ballot so they don't have to defend them.
But Bill, all governors do that. I mean, Democrats and Republicans have always timed ballots in the general elections to match, turning out or not turning out base. What I think is interesting, and I agree with you generally, it's a strange practice, but both governors, all of them do it. What's interesting to me is I think the Republicans are waving the white flag on this one. Normally, Medicaid expansion would be an issue that they'd use a lot of tropes and they'd use a lot of their playbook. And a Medicaid expansion in a pandemic is a very different thing. And particularly what it means to rural hospitals. And I think they realize, I think the fact that Governor Parson politically wisely put this on the August ballot pretty much indicates they know it's going to pass the expansion. And by the way, it should.
Sure.
I'm in favor of it, but I think it's going to be a tough row to hoe because when and I'm a union guy, when we were working to get right to work off, and that was, in August of 2017, I mean, we made 1 million phone calls, knocked on 800,000 doors. There were 100,000 signs put up, and it all started in early May of that year. And this year, first of all, we don't know who's going to be voting given the pandemic. I mean, that remains to be seen. And the other thing is there enough time to organize a massive effort to pass this thing?
Well, I think that most Missourians have pretty much said that they were in favor of that, be you rural, be you Republican, be you Democrat. And then also I'm with you, Ray, because by putting it on the ballot in August, the largest county, in Missouri, which is St. Louis County, is going to be voting. And there's a big race for county executive. And other than that, that's it. So you're going to have every Democrat in the world out there voting, and they're all vote for, not all, but you know what I'm saying.
Right.
So I think he's conceding. And let's just get it out of the way.
There are two lawsuits, though, this week, as we know, that have been filed. And it seems like they are attempting to get it off the ballot completely.
Right.
And I don't know what a judge would be able to do with this kind of a thing. But it's because the socioeconomic parts of this pandemic are so clearly defined. It to me, it just makes him look very tone deaf. I'm not sure that that's going to hurt him with his base, but
I see. I have to tell you, Alvin, that's a great point about the county executives. I hadn't thought about that, but I have to say that there. First of all, one of the things that's so ridiculous about this is literally billions of dollars are at stake for the Missouri by expanding Medicaid, federal money that we pay in. So it actually ought to be an issue that fiscal conservatives favor to start with. I just think that, they run on those kinds
but
of
Charlie,
speaking of money,
what commercial could you run What commercial could you run anti-Medicaid expansion?
Right.
That you just can't even
During a
campaign
pandemic.
against
Well,
it.
sure you can. You say, hey, there's a 10% match, and 10% of billions is hundreds of millions. So that's the other side of that.
People
Hey,
want health
Alvin.
insurance.
Good point.
They want health insurance, and it's really hard, as it would be for a Republican
All right.
to run against health insurance.
Alvin Reid, what do you think about, speaking of millions of dollars, we do know that the state of Illinois is billions in debt and has hundreds of millions of dollars, it has hundreds of billions of dollars in unpaid pensions and all that and more. So in this pandemic, when tax receipts are low, there is an issue. Should the government workers in Illinois be getting pay raises that they're entitled to in June? I mean, that's the schedule anyway, including lawmakers. What do you think?
Well, if the lawmakers want to say we're not going to take ours, that's fine. But
I haven't heard that yet.
I haven't either. And what you do for all, you probably have to do for all. But I just think, hey, if you do that raise, then you should get that raise. Now, I know times are tough, but hey, there's a lot of individuals, there are a lot of businesses, there are a lot of entities out there that are getting a big government check that really don't need it. Now, I think the people who are getting this raise probably need it. Now, Illinois has been in the forefront of handling this pandemic the right way. So I can't look at them with a slight eye and say these people should not get their raises. I just, I was promised a raise, I should get a raise. Now, if people get laid off or furloughed, then you could get in unemployment or get on PPP or whatever. But I just think, you were promised a raise, give them your raise.
Well, I'm sorry, Alvin. I think that these are difficult times, and the government workers are fortunate that these are recession-proof, pandemic-proof jobs they have, and the citizenry is in many people are in great financial struggle. And I think to say that, well, we were supposed to get a raise, so we're going to darn sure get that raise. I think this would be a really good time for government workers to say, this is a shared burden, and we know people are suffering, and not a good time to get a raise.
Well, the state of Illinois today released their unemployment benefit filing information, and it is 12 times what it was a year ago. 12 times during this same period last year. As of today in the country, 41 million Americans filing for unemployment claims or unemployment benefits since the middle of March, the end of March. This is not a time that even if I worked for the government and was, deserving of a raise, that I'd feel comfortable with it.
Okay, now,
I'm with Bill.
having said that, Wendy, let me follow up with Wendy here. Would you expand the convention center? The St. Louis Municipal Development Fund, again, canceled a meeting this week where it was supposed to vote on expanding the convention center and spending $105 million to do that. But for the second month in a row, they've tabled the measure. And who knows? President Lewis Reed of the St. Louis Board of Aldermen says, we're not sure at this point, given everything, we should be expanding the St. Louis Convention Center.
But he also, he said that they have a lot to think about, and he seemed to be saying that it's not a good idea to just pull your support out entirely and not do any types of renovations. I think there's got to be, that golden mean somewhere, in the middle where the don't do anything and then $100 million. There's got to be some way to negotiate an amount of work to be done that everybody's comfortable with.
I agree.
It's very important for the future of the downtown area.
I agree with Wendy. We are still the 21st largest metropolitan area. We are a major convention center. It is a big part of what our local economy is built on, hotels and restaurants. It's a big deal to us. And you cannot, now it may be delayed by the pandemic. And I didn't get a chance, but I wanted to, before he jumps on me, I want to agree with Bill on not giving raises to people in a pandemic. And you might have to delay funding for it. But long term, the
You're
idea
agreeing with me, Ray, or disagreeing?
doesn't invest in its convention center to keep it. It hasn't been. It's fallen apart. I mean, you have
Yeah,
to
but
have
who knows
state-of-the-art
after
facilities.
in the
We'll
age
have
of
conventions
Zoom,
again.
who knows if we're going to have
We
conventions
will have
again?
conventions again. Come on, we'll have conventions.
We'll have conventions
Who
again.
needs them?
Delayed, but we will have conventions again.
You know, I got to tell you something, guys. My lovely wife, Beth, this week was supposed to be at a convention on low-income housing in downtown St. Louis. Of course, because of the pandemic, it was canceled, all right? So instead, she addressed 1,500 people on Zoom. And you got to believe that there are going to be people out there saying, well, if we had the 2020 convention via Zoom, why can't the year 2021 and 2022 be via Zoom? And we would save a boatload of cash.
I think
I don't think that's how humans want to interact. I think eventually, particularly once we get a vaccine, people want personal contact with one another.
I'll just tell the truth.
I agree. It's
wait, Ray, tell the truth.
Not anybody on this call. Not
Like
anybody.
in Lake
on
of
this
the
call.
Ozarks.
We don't want personal contact.
And this is true. People want to get out of their hometown and go have some crazy fun someplace, and that's not going to change. So people will go to conventions. There will be conventions, and all of it is not about, oh, there's so much information I got, and the people I met. Oh no, there was the bars that were in Nashville or whatever. I just think we could put the brakes on that, because right now, I still have always believed this. St. Louis has no plan. We don't know where we're going. We don't know what we're doing. And like I said, Charlie, you got one Lewis Reed, and Wendy, you got one Lewis Reed. We got Lewis Reed talking out of both sides of his mouth. What else is new? I just have no confidence. And that's why I'm just not, this is not the time for that. I just have zero confidence.
We sell conventions. That's our plan. You have to understand, what are the first things that convention planners, most of them based in DC, look at, or even regional conventions look at, are the facilities that your community has. Everybody has to invest in those. It's not a choice. It's got nothing to do with politicians.
Yeah, Ray. You know, the Four Seasons has gone out of business permanently. How successful have conventions been in downtown St. Louis?
Conventions are a big part of our community,
oh, really?
Charlie.
Then why is every hotel subsidized by the government?
That's not true.
It is. It is.
It is.
You
right
cannot.
now.
Every hotel gets tax credits right now from the government. Every single one.
It's got nothing to do with this subject. Nothing.
Well, I'm just saying.
You're talking about pre-pandemic, Charlie? Pre-pandemic, every single one of them.
It's got nothing to do with this. They get subsidized.
Ray, you used to write about how we were subsidizing the convention
I have
hotel.
to support my fellow founder on this. If you're going to try to get conventions, you got to have an up-to-date place. And to put it all off, for a few years doesn't make much sense to me.
Well, let me ask you, Ray, it was announced this week that Kim Gardner is going to be running for re-election. I don't think that's too new, but just assess the overall landscape. I mean, she's been criticized heavily. And in fact, her special expert, Donald Tisby, was supposed to be on trial right now on perjury charges. But Rex Burleson and other judges have moved all but the homicide cases to 2021. So I guess we'll hear more about Tisby next year. But she's a city prosecutor who had 60 attorneys going into office. Now she's down to 17. Is she going to be reelected?
I think so. And I think the events that happened in Minneapolis, which we don't need to go into other than to say that they are something that has resonated really across party lines around the country, help her make her closing argument, because she's about reform. And I happen to think she's going to win. And I think her chances to win probably were enhanced indirectly by what's happening right now. There's a lot of, I think, understandable rage in the African-American community. And it doesn't reflect, I'm not saying that what happened in Minnesota necessarily reflects on our folks, but it will be felt here.
I just think that people have already decided whether you're going to vote for Kim Gardner or not. So I just don't know that would have that much of an impact. I put it this way, and I forget the woman's name who's going to run against
Mary Pat Carl's running.
Okay. It depends on her campaign. And I mean, she can't, just like we said, you can't campaign against Medicaid expansion. She can't campaign, like, I don't care what the police do. Now, I mean, she can maybe intimate that, but that's why I said, like, by the time we get to that election, I just don't think it'll have that much impact.
I think Ray's right. I'm not a big Kim Gardner fan, but Kim Gardner is very anti-police. And anytime there's police misconduct, it helps somebody like Kim Gardner. So I think the whole thing in Minneapolis is a help to Kim Gardner's campaign.
Well, I'm not so sure. Don't forget when after Michael Brown, the voters in St. Louis were asked to raise the pay for police, and every ward north of Delmar voted for it.
Well, keep in mind something, Charlie. This is a really different story, and we don't want to get into all the details of it. This is one where the folks on Sean Hannity and Fox News are going ballistic against the police officer. So this is no comparison. This is on camera.
But you know what?
I think
also, every poll of St. Louisans say that public safety is paramount.
Right.
It tops everything else, even tops education.
And I think that's why one of the most
education taxes. And we do know this is a circuit attorney who has dropped a lot of cases at the last minute for inexplicable reasons.
I think she will be reelected. And that's...
Hey, Alvin, what did you make of we unfortunately, Alvin, over the weekend, we did have a crime spree, like 17 people shot, 4 dead. What do you make of this, Alvin?
Well, I just thought that it's just an oddity. Right about the time we were talking about relaxing, the shelter in place, it's like people came back out of the house and resumed killing each other. And does that mean that if you told them there's a curfew, so you have to be in the house by 1 o'clock? Would that actually work? This is one
That's a great question.
We need a sociologist on, in one of these coming weeks to say, like, was this all coincidence? Was this all kind of some weirdness, or is there something to it? Because I didn't get it, and I'm not being like humorous in the least.
No,
really, like people who are willing to kill each other over dope or money or whatever took a hiatus.
I just think
the shelter in place.
30 seconds ago, folks.
What's it? 30
seconds.
Real quick, I think Alvin's got a point, but I think it's got a lot to do just statistically with the fact that fewer people are out. And but just like we've had benefits to the environment for not having cars driving, I think. But it's an interesting point.
That is a good point, right?
Boston has had a curfew for at least part of the spring of 2020. Maybe we'll get into that in St. Louis. Well, folks, don't touch that dial. We're going to be back for part 2 in just a moment with Jim McKelvey, one of the co-founders of Square. I hope you join us.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network. Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Hey, thanks for joining us for the second half, and we are so proud on this edition of Donnybrook Part 2 to welcome Jim McKelvey, proud son of St. Louis, a WashU grad. In fact, you've heard of the McKelvey School of Engineering. Here's the guy, ladies and gentlemen, and his dad taught at the school. He was a glass blower before he became the co-founder of Square. And if you're not familiar with Square, it's a little device. I'm holding mine in front of the camera right now. It allows me to take payments via my iPhone or tablet. It's now a $30 billion company. And it's also written about by Jim in his new book, The Innovation Stack. Jim McKelvey, thanks for joining us on Donnybrook. How are you?
Thanks. What an honor to be here.
Now,
we're honored. It's our honor.
Square been affected by the pandemic? Obviously, if economic activity decreases, I guess fewer people will be making payments on a device like this. Am I right?
Oh, yeah. And especially our merchants, they tend to be smaller individual proprietors, but they're also super resilient. What we've seen, Charlie, is this sort of mass innovation from all these little merchants who, they used to have restaurants and now they're doing pickup. And we're just seeing a lot of economic activity. We're also seeing a lot of chaos. We're also seeing a lot of pain. So it's not a good thing. We would certainly not want this, but it does prove that the small businesses are very scrappy.
Bill, you've got a question for Jim.
Oh, I do, Jim. First of all, thank you for buying the Post-Dispatch building, where I spent many years working. And when Square announced that they were buying that building, all the restaurants and bars on Washington Avenue were thrilled, because suddenly there was going to be an influx of young, hip people with money. And then the next thing we hear is that you're going to allow work from home indefinitely. And I'm wondering, what is that going to do with a building like the Post-Dispatch building that we thought was going to be filled with young workers?
Well, we think it'll still be filled with young workers, and not just young workers. We have a pretty broad spectrum of ages that we employ, but we're trying to test out everything that works. And what we've noticed at Square is that working remotely, in some cases, is more productive, and people prefer it. So if you can do your job remotely, we believe you should be able to. But that doesn't decrease the value of getting together in the office. I mean, like, just because we're all sitting here, in our respective living rooms, doesn't mean that, this is a normal Donnybrook show. Like, if we were sitting together, I mean, it's just a different level of communication when you're physically next to somebody. And that's sort of special. I mean, I myself can't work at home very effectively. When I do anything, like when I write, I have to physically leave my house and just go to someplace that's crowded, because for some reason, people around me keeps my brain going. And, if I'm here, I mean, look around this room. This is pretty dull. Look at that. Yeah, you need some energy.
Okay. Well, I hope that works out that way. I mean, I've always been a person who enjoys the camaraderie of work, and this working remotely sounds foreboding to me.
Yeah, but I mean, have you seen the new Post-Dispatch offices? I mean, they're super cool.
I have seen them.
Yeah. There you go. It's
Wendy?
a great place to work.
The really amazing thing, Mr. McKelvey, is to see the larger businesses and even many of the smaller businesses, they have adapted. It seems to be that instinct to adapt, pivot, adapt. Can you speak to people who are still sort of in the kind of paralyzed with fear stage about the future? What is the most important thing to remember when a business has to pivot and adapt? How do they do that? What's the easiest way for them to do that?
So if you are paralyzed with fear, I am your brother. Like, I know exactly what that's like. And the reason, at least I get scared, is because I don't know what's going to happen next. And the situations that I'm in that trigger that fear are ones where I'm doing something new. So if I'm doing something that hasn't been done before, like starting Square. I mean, honestly, when we started Square, we had no idea it was going to work. We were underwriting merchants that were so small they couldn't, participate in the system. There were 17 laws and rules that we were violating with every transaction. That sort of fear of the unknown is honestly an appropriate response if you're doing something new. Sort of this is the reason I wrote the book, is that I think we don't spend enough time respecting when it's appropriate to be afraid. And the reason I wrote the book was because I have a friend who is incredibly qualified, but every time she comes across a problem that hasn't been solved before, in other words, a situation where she can't copy the solution, she says, well, I'm not going to do this. And my point to her and to everybody is, look, expertise is fantastic. If you can be an expert, be an expert. But there's some things we can't be experts in, and that's new stuff. So it hasn't been done before. You can't be an expert. And the funny situation is that we have all now sort of worldwide been thrown into this crazy world that we don't have any experts in. I mean, I'm on the Fed, and I actually talked to Jim Bullard this morning, and they're still guessing. I mean, they're making their best guesses, but nobody's had experience here. So I feel for everybody personally, because I've often found myself in these situations. And what I should say is that you don't need a special set of skills to navigate it, but it will still be uncomfortable.
Great.
Thank you.
How did you think of Square? How did you come up with it with Jack? I mean, I actually am amazed, and I don't mean to patronize you, but we're not considered the Silicon Valley here in St. Louis. But when you look at you and Mr. Dorsey, it's like kind of a disproportionate amount of like international juggernauts that are launched out of St. Louis. I'm kind of curious, how is that something we should be talking about more as a city?
I mean, I don't know. You don't want to sound like you're bragging, but I mean, St. Louis does, create a lot of, great businesses. And the idea for Square came to me as I was sitting in my, glass studio on Del Mar. I was trying to sell a piece of glass to a lady who had an American Express card. I lost the sale because I couldn't take a payment. Jack Dorsey and I had worked together years ago at a company that I had in downtown St. Louis, actually on Jefferson and Gravois. At the corner of Jefferson and Gravois, I had a little business, and Jack and I had already agreed to start a new company together, but we had not chosen an idea. And when I lost that sale, I said, well, this is what we should do. We should build a way for small merchants to get paid. Because as a small merchant myself, I knew what it was like to lose a sale because you couldn't take a piece of plastic.
Could you call me if you have any other ideas for things you want?
I got tons of ideas, but
somebody just sort of to tag along one of your, uncertain ideas. Have you talked to? Obviously you're still partners with Jack Dorsey, right?
Yeah.
And can I ask you, did you have any feeling about him being kind of on the international stage even more than usual today with the president's attack on social media, or would you rather not talk about that?
I genuinely feel for Jack because he has a very public-facing job, or jobs, actually. He's, CEO of 2 public companies. And he's chosen that life. And I'm really happy that he's the one who does that stuff, because I'd rather be, here in a nondescript room, talking to you guys.
James, I got to tell you, I worked at a bookstore in Kirkwood in 2014. And one day the credit card machine was not working. And I'm like, holy moly. And then one of the young ladies who worked there had Square. First time I ever saw it work. First time I saw the thing. Saved us over about a 3 or 4 day period. So, I mean, I could testify going back 6 years that, hey, this works. It saved us over those 3 or 4 days. And, you mentioned being publicly traded. I want to ask you something about business-wise, what's going on in the country. Stock market's doing well, but at the same time, we're hearing the economy is a bust and it's going to take years to come back. Can you explain the dichotomy between those two?
Well, not any better than anybody else who's guessing.
Yeah. Oh, in 30 seconds also. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Look, again, I'm not a qualified, nobody's qualified to do this. So I guess I can comment with as little qualification as anyone would have. But look, what you're seeing right now is the businesses that are well connected are able to get support money from the government, and they're in relatively better shape than the very, very smallest people. The people who are unbanked, underbanked, may not have social security numbers, may not be connected properly with the IRS. They don't have the sort of connections to the infrastructure. And unfortunately, if you look at the unemployment, 40% of the people who earn under $40,000 a year have lost their jobs. And that's tragic. And then if you extrapolate that and say, well, we're sort of a consumer-driven economy, I mean, that could be really terrifying. Mm-hmm. And my opinion is that every day this goes on, we're taking a risk. But on the other hand, we're also physically taking a risk with our lives if we don't take some precautionary measures. So it's a balance, and everyone's trying to figure out the best balance. And I like the fact that there's a lot of diversity of opinion.
Well, Jim, what did you make of the government's actions by, among other things, giving $1,200 to every adult who makes less than $100,000, and also giving forgivable loans to businesses as long as they keep 75% of the money on payroll? And then, of course, there's $600 a week for unemployment. What do you think about all this?
Well, what you're looking for in a time of crisis is pipes that exist. So the reason we're using the unemployment pipes is because that was a system that was set up beforehand to get money to people who'd lost their jobs. So we had this thing called unemployment that was designed to get money to people who'd lost their jobs. And so a lot of people are not really losing their jobs, but they're being essentially sent away for an indefinite period of time. So the unemployment pipes were just an appropriate set of pipes to use. Not perfect, of course, but pretty good. And then, that mailing the check to people, well, I got a little more problem with that because you're trying to mail checks to people. Well, first of all, you can use the word mail. Okay, what does that mean? That means I have to have an address. And if my address is somehow screwed up, then I might not get my money. And sort of the lower you go on the rungs of society, the more disconnected you get. So unfortunately, the system was never designed to water the real roots of society. And it's not a fault. It's just that we didn't have the plumbing. One of the best things we've seen at Square is something called the Cash App. So I don't know if y'all how many here use Cash App? Does anyone even know what I'm talking about? Okay, so you guys all got to learn something. You got to download the Cash App. It is a person-to-person payment system, but it's being used by 60 million small businesses and individuals, mostly individuals, as sort of a all-in-one financial tool. So you can get paid, you can get a debit card, you can collect money, you can take your stimulus money from the government, you can apply for loans. Like it's really this little like banking in your pocket. And something like that has been really helpful because the people that predominantly use the Cash App don't have many of them don't have other banking relationships. So that's really what's important. And we've got a whole part of society that's just not connected, and it's terrifying.
Well, Jim, I was going to ask you about that, the part of society that's not connected, and we have this new economy that you're in the middle of, and it seems like the people who are behind are being left further behind. What did you think of like Andrew Yang's idea of giving everybody a wage?
I don't know how that works. Bill, I'm not really into politics that much. And so I never ran the numbers. But I guess my question is, who pays it, right? Is that paid through taxing? And the taxation system is not terribly fair right now. So I guess my question is, well, where's the money coming from? I think you could probably do better if you invested in infrastructure and education. But that's just one man's opinion.
Mm-hmm. I have a follow-up to your Cash App. Did you say that 60 million people this is their only banking way? Basically, they don't have banking?
We have about 60 million users, roughly, I think. And the people who are using it, actually, I'm looking it up as we're going right now. There are about 4 million people on the Cash App that are not connected to a bank. They don't have a banking account. Or it's not just a banking account. They don't have a connection that allows the government stimulus money to get to them. And I don't know if the break is at the IRS or at the banking level. I'm sorry, I don't have my data straight on exactly what it is. But there are 4 million people who are not connected except to the Cash App.
Okay, I didn't know if Cash App was a way to maybe phase out banking. That'd be good.
No, I mean, look, banking has
people working at banks.
We're not trying to eliminate banking here. But what you're trying to do is give the tools that previously only the wealthy had to individuals. So for instance, on Cash App, I can trade stocks. Okay, I can trade a fraction. I could buy a fraction of Berkshire Hathaway. Well, Berkshire has a 6-figure, share price, but I can buy a fraction of it. So as an individual, I can, buy a little bit of what Warren Buffett is doing. I can buy a fraction of Apple. I can buy as much as I want. I can buy and sell Bitcoin. I can transfer money to friends instantly. I can receive money. I can receive my government stimulus money. And we keep adding features to this. And the beautiful thing about those features is that you're talking about people who, otherwise might have to wait in line to cash a check, or might have to go to a check cashing place that's going to charge them, an outrageous fee to receive their own money. So we really love giving tools that, previously were, only for, sort of the rich and powerful, give them to everybody, and then see how the world improves.
You obviously travel in circles and talk to a lot of people with very learned expert advice and opinions. This has always kind of seemed to a lot of us as, very similar to a flood, where you don't really see the damage until the water starts to recede. have you talked to anybody? And I know you said it's difficult to even move because we don't know what's around the corner. But are there any learned guesstimates out there, Mr. McKelvey, as to how far out these reverberations are going to go in a calendar sense, if you will?
So nobody knows. I mean, I can tell you that Jim Bullard of the St. Louis Fed looked at the data this morning and thought that we were sort of at the trough. He thought that we were sort of bottoming on the numbers and that hopefully there would be some improvements. That's one man's guess. But Jim's a pretty good guy to, if you got to listen to one man, you probably want to listen to the president of the St. Louis Fed because he's got phenomenal data. But nobody really knows. But look, it's not going to come back the way it was. I think what we're seeing right now is a disconnection of a lot of institutions that were very elitist. So I'll give you an example. The rent for a single person to live in San Francisco is $3,000 to $5,000 a month. Okay, if you want to live in San Francisco, city of San Francisco, or New York is about the same price. That's about what you have to pay. So you can think of the city of New York or the city of San Francisco as a very exclusive club. And you only get to be a member of that club if you can pay the rent. And we have some pretty exclusive clubs in other areas. A lot of our educational institutions are exclusive clubs. Then there's some physical clubs that are exclusive clubs. But there are a lot of things that essentially exclude people because there hasn't been the ability for everyone to pay the toll to get in. What we're seeing right now that I think is very positive is breaking of those connections. The club's closed, right? And so we're doing these remote meetings. We're allowing people to work remotely. We're saying, hey, look, you don't have to come into the office ever, and what does that mean to somebody who's able to do the job, but couldn't pay to get into the club? I think it's very positive. I think you've got a situation here where people are going to be able to access more opportunity than they previously could because we've broken a lot of those bonds through this pandemic.
Thanks, Wendy. You just took my question.
Sorry.
What I was going to say was if you 3 months ago or before that, Alvin, you're going to be doing meetings on Zoom. I'd have said no, I'm not. Why would I ever, I don't, that doesn't sound good to me. And you're mentioning banking. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who would say no, my money will always in the bank and all my transactions will be through, in my case, Bank of America. In the time, let's go back to mid-March. Are you already feeling that people who never, ever thought that they would be involved in digital or breaking away from your traditional institutions, are you feeling that maybe by force, but they are now willing to do this and take that chance?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what you see in any great crisis, it tends to accelerate change that was going to happen anytime, So the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, was a big accelerator for mobile technology. Things were disrupted and people started, playing with their smartphones and doing new things on their smartphones. That's when Square launched. We launched in the middle of a recession. The recession is actually a really good time to start a business because if you are a small business, your world is going to be chaos anyway. And if the rest of the world is in chaos, you're at a relatively advantaged position. Since you got to deal with chaos anyway, it's good if all the people you're competing with are also in chaos, right? And if everything's running smoothly and all, the clubs are working and all the rich are keeping to themselves and all the elite people are doing their elite things and you can't break in or get a meeting or get any attention or afford to do what you need to do, that's sort of a crummy environment. And that's, by the way, the environment that we've had for the last decade almost. So I think, and I'm again not trying to paint a big smiley face on a pandemic, but you're going to see a lot of change accelerating. And it's change that's probably pretty healthy, but the stress on the system just forces things to accelerate. And, I'll give you an example. I've got a favorite restaurant nearby my house, and we used to always go there, but it was sort of a pain in the neck to get a table. And now they've got their carryout so good that we can order, we can pick up the food. I don't even have to get out of my car. They're just right on the curb. I can be home and seated at my house where I'd actually rather eat than sit in this restaurant. Now I pay the same amount of money, but they've created a better experience. Now, am I going to want that experience a year from now when we're all back to normal? Yeah, probably.
Hey, Jim, if you're renovating 900 North Tucker, you're obviously bullish on St. Louis and downtown St. Louis. Nonetheless, are there recommendations for our city or our region that you would make?
Oh God. We
In 30 seconds.
yeah, 30 seconds, fix St. Louis. Look,
Okay, take 45 seconds.
I think we really got to double down on our strengths, and we got to double down on the connection. Like, the one thing that I've always griped about St. Louis is that we're still a divided city, economically and racially and socially in a lot of ways. And I'd like to see those barriers come down as quickly as possible, because the more that we can involve the talent that's, sort of around the town, the better. And the interesting thing about what we're doing at 900 North Tucker is we're spending a significant amount of money to turn the entrance of the building, which for all its years has faced the south. We're turning it to face the north, because we think the potential is in the northern part of the city. It's the most underutilized, land and skills and people. I mean, I think the opportunities to look at the areas that have been undervalued is the best thing we can do. So we're literally facing the building north.
Jim, do you think all this remote working and everything is going to be a boon for St. Louis, that instead of paying $5,000 for an apartment in San Francisco or New York, somebody can buy a home for less than that a month? Is the future looking good for St. Louis because of all these innovations?
Yeah, Bill, if we keep doubling down on the improvement of our life, okay, so anything that we can do to invest in the quality of life, so anything that improves safety, anything that improves community, bike paths are a great thing, any civic institution, any restaurant, anything that we could do to make a person move to St. Louis. Because what we really need to do, if we're going to sort of bring this city up, is we need to attract talent. And the talent is very mobile. And so if St. Louis is a net loser of talent, we're going to suffer. And we've been suffering, for God's sake, for like the last 50 years. But I think we need to reverse that trend. And the best thing we can do is not try to create some sort of, like low tax haven where, nobody bothers you. What we want to do is create a system that works well. And if you look at the places that work well, they're not the lowest tax spots in the world. I mean, New York's high tax, San Francisco's high tax, the Bay Area's high tax, and a lot of the European capitals are super high tax. So people are actually willing to pay some tax if they get the benefit of the infrastructure. So anything we can do to invest in the quality of life, I think is a great investment. We've got fantastic museums. We've actually got two things that I always sell when I'm pushing the city. The first is we've got a culture of education in St. Louis that is exceptional, not just good, it's exceptional. Public schools, private schools, they're fantastic, and they're fantastic in comparison to what you can get in any of the major cities, with the exception of DC. Washington, D.C., I think, has a better public-private operation, but basically, I think we're a strong number two. We're also probably top 10 in healthcare. And if you look at Washington University and Barnes and the other hospital systems are doing, it's really world-class stuff. And if you are probably over 30 and married, healthcare and education mean a lot. And I think we don't sell that enough. And I hate it when people tell, folks to come to St. Louis because it's, we can get a cheap house. I don't want a cheap house. What I want is an awesome place to live.
Jim, it's interesting you raise that, because I hear two competing narratives all the time. One is companies like yours, the Cortex, and we have all this excitement. And we've been very resilient with some neighborhoods like the Grand Center that Channel 9's in, and everything from the Grove to Cherokee Street to the West End, all the things happening. But you always hear the competing narrative that young people don't want to stay here. And how do we kind of reconcile those two? Because they seem to be equally spoken.
With a minute to go.
Well, you got to ask the young people. I mean, I'm 54. I don't count anymore. But TrailNet's a great thing. Let's get some more bike paths. Young people are very good at telling you what they want. So you listen and you just basically open up the opportunities to them. We've got a lot of really cool housing stock. We've got a lot of access that they can't get on the coasts. And hopefully, if we can sell that, we'll attract them.
Jim, we got to let you go here. Sorry, Wendy, you'll get the first question next week. We have to let Jim go.
Where did he go to high school?
Ladue Public.
The Innovation Stack, written by Jim McKelvey, our guest on this edition of Donnybrook Part 2. Thanks, Jim, for joining us. Good luck, and hello to everybody at Square.
Definitely. I'm 59. You got a resume coming.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We'll see you next week. Keep it on the 9 Network.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.